So, welcome to the Miko Love Podcast. I'm your host, Kumiko Love. And if you are new here, then welcome. I am so glad you found the podcast. All right, today we're jumping into an episode with a very special guest, Maya Corbic. And you might know her on Instagram, Teach Kids Money. And I thought this was a perfect time to bring her on because, as you all know, my almost 13-year-old just got his first debit card. And I am in the thick of trying to teach him the concepts between spending and saving, but not only that, encouraging him to save more. So I thought this would be a great topic. And I know so many of you in my audience is mamas. And so who have kids who are just like me, who are starting this process. Now with James, I started really young, around 3 years old is when I tried teaching him concepts of money. Really small things like counting coins and that type of thing. So Maya, thank you so much for coming on the Miko Love podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and how did you get on this path of really having this passion about teaching kids about money?
Well, first of all, Kumiko, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm a big fan of everything that you do. So I actually am a first generation immigrant. I immigrated from war-torn Bosnia when I was 15. My family lost everything in the war. We came with only $50 in 2 suitcases. I immigrated to Toronto, Canada, and I lived in government shelters, government housing. I had 2 part-time jobs when I was a teenager. And fast forward, I became a CPA. About almost 13 years ago, I started reflecting on my life and what I was doing. And my husband and I, at that time, we paid off all of our debt, including our mortgage. And I liked my job, but I wasn't crazy about it.
Right.
And I really wanted to do something different to make a difference. And I realized that a lot of my clients were struggling with money. And once I started looking into it deeper, I realized that a lot of them were struggling with money because nobody ever taught them about money.
Right.
And my kids at that time were 6 and 4 years old. And I wanted to learn, or actually they were a little bit younger, I think, but I wanted to figure out, okay, what are they going to learn in school? And back then, schools didn't really teach much. A lot has changed over the last decade. Kids are starting to learn financial literacy in schools, but back then, they weren't. So I realized it was really up to me to teach them. And I started experimenting. I was ordering some books. I remember on Amazon, I could only find 2 books on money. And kids now, there's so many of them. So the world has really changed in a positive direction. But I was experimenting with my own kids. And then very shortly after that, I was asked to go to schools and teach all different students from kindergarten to grade 12. And then COVID happened. And then I switched to, being online. And so now my content, I help parents teach kids about money, doing it. I do it online, and I have a Wealthy Kids Investment Club where I teach parents to invest and kids to invest.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because you don't hear very often about kids investing, which it's possible. There are things that you can do to start them out young. That I love that. Now, where can listeners, I already mentioned you're on Instagram, but you said you have a course. What is the course called again?
So it's actually it's not a course, it's a membership. It's called Wealthy Kids Investment Club. But they can find this one is easy to find. So it's actually wealthykids.club. So .club, instead of com. But I do have a free cheat sheet that I can give out to your listeners on basically 4 simple steps that I use to invest with my kids. So that's something that we can link in the show notes.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and link all that, and we'll come back to that at the end of this episode where my listeners can find you. One thing I did want to ask: why do you think financial literacy for kids is so important in today's world, especially it's such a consumerist world? I feel like even since me growing up, the consumerism level has substantially increased. How do we prepare our children in today's world?
So that's a great question. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. We live in a consumer oriented society. Just recently, I watched that documentary on Netflix, By Now. I
Yes.
don't know if you've seen it. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. It's quite disturbing. And
It is so crazy.
yes. And the thing is that now more than ever, I feel like it's important to teach our kids about money because a lot of kids have access to social media and the perception of reality has been skewed. Our children
Yes.
don't know what is normal anymore.
Yeah.
What is, how many toys are
Yeah.
enough? What kind of clothing a teenager should be wearing? They should not be wearing designer purses or designer
Nuts.
dresses or,
Yes.
I mean, if they can afford it, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But or if
Yeah.
it brings them joy. But I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But
Right.
I think we just need to establish the norm as the parents. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the norm? What are our family values so that we can prepare the kids for the adulthood so they don't become disappointed, but also they can get themselves in a lot of financial trouble if they're trying to keep up with these trends that are on social media.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh, 100% agree. And it's really funny because not until just this year, my son, okay, he's going to be 13 in August. He was never ever in designer clothes or wanted certain brands. He always used to tell me, "Mom, I want just black and no logos." I'm like, "Awesome. Walmart, here I come." I mean, you're going to ruin it in a week anyways. But just this year for Christmas, he said, "Mom, all I want for Christmas is a brand new wardrobe." And that really surprised me. And I said, "Well, why? Like, what do you want?" He was listing Nike Tech. By the way, Nike Tech is like $200 for a sweatshirt and a pair of pants. He wanted like a $200 pair of shoes. I'm like, where are you getting this? Some of it he told me he saw online. But a lot of it too is seeing his friends at school have all these certain clothes, right? He doesn't know they're knockoffs, but he sees all these things. So that was a thing that we started dealing with. And it's so true. I can't agree more about the social media. And not only that, the people that surround our children, other children in school also play a huge role because like my son's at that age where he's so vulnerable, where all he wants to do is fit in. And I feel like I remember what it was like when I was in middle school. I wanted to fit in, so you would almost do anything to kind of feel like you belong. And one of the ways that we express ourselves is through our appearance, right? It's a big, big thing. I remember my mom was a single mom working 3 jobs. And I remember specifically every year for back to school shopping, she would take us to JC Penney's. And I remember being that stuck up, stubborn, spoiled little brat girl that I was, just begging my mom for more clothes, right? Because I felt like that's what would make me fit in. And I struggled with that type of confidence in myself all the way through adulthood. But so, yes, I 100% agree. Now, would you also agree that social media not only skews our reality, but I feel like it also gives us a glimpse into other people's worlds that we never had before. I never had that. I mean, it affects not so much just adults, but also young kids who are watching all these videos.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be good and bad
Yeah,
getting a glimpse into other people's worlds. It just depends on what it is that we are being exposed to. And I think that's why
right.
it's so important to have these conversations with our kids and explain to them, what is really normal. And then sometimes, I'm sure you've seen all, these influencers. Some of them will
Mhm.
do something just for the camera, just for the video, but in real life, they don't
Yes.
really do any of this stuff, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, look at Ryan's toy review. I mean, I remember James, when he used to watch that show, that little boy makes so much money. And then he goes out and he influences all these kids to want all these toys.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
crazy. I mean, it's nuts. Okay, what do you think is the biggest challenge that parents face in teaching kids about money?
So I think it's exactly what you said. Just trying to balance out being teaching them to be money savvy
Mm,
while, fitting in,
mm,
with their friends. And some parents out there, they're actually struggling themselves to
yeah,
understand how money works
yeah,
and struggling to make ends meet. So they need to teach themselves first and just sort of stay afloat before they can actually start teaching
yeah.
their kids.
Yeah, that was my big thing when I got my divorce. I ended up in a pile of debt, didn't know anything about money. And so it was great that through that my own financial journey, I was able to involve my child in that financial journey. And so he kind of learned along with me from 3 years old all the way up until now today. He's still highly involved in my money morning routines and all of that. So, what are the best ways to introduce financial concept to kids at different ages? So, I have a toddler also. I have a 13-year-old and I have a 1.5-year-old. It's a big age difference. So let's talk about toddlers and preschoolers. So, introducing simple concepts like saving and spending. Is that a good place to start for that age?
So for toddlers, I would say they are a little bit young, but one thing that we can teach them is to take care of their own possessions. So to
Oh,
appreciate their possessions, that can easily translate to appreciating our possessions later on in life and cherishing what we
yes.
have. And as long as we take care of it, that means it's going to serve us for a very long time, and we don't
Yes.
necessarily will need to buy something new. It's
Right.
about organizing their toys, which can later on translate to, like, organizing our budget and our
Yes.
finances, right?
Yes.
uh, and then I would say teaching kids to save can probably start in preschool, like age 4 or 5.
Okay.
So
Okay.
putting some money aside and teaching them that, when we put that money aside, that money grows. So that could
Right.
be by rewarding them and, giving them a little bit of fairy interest, on their
Yeah.
dollar. Like if they save $1, they get 25 cents, or you may want to match that dollar so that, that money
Yes.
grows and they can see it grow.
Right. And what about teens? Like my son is just about to be a teenager and we're currently working on he just got his first debit card. And so we're
Hmm.
working on not only he's pretty good about saving and spending, but I'm trying to teach him to get away from instant gratification and more of prolonged gratification. And he saves really well, but then he wants to spend the money he just saved. So I have to explain
True.
to him, well, that's not really saving then if you're turning around and just spending it. So that's something that we're working on. So let's talk about teens. What are the best ways to kind of introduce important financial concepts at that time? Because teens is a very important age, I feel like, as far as financial literacy, because you're prepping and prepare them really to go out on their own. So they need to learn about how to work with debt and their credit score and all those really big major concepts.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. I want to go back to what you said about saving and
Mm.
instant gratification. So, one thing that I like to practice with teenagers is to actually have two buckets for savings. Like one of them
Oh,
is for long-term saving for goals that matter. And sometimes the long-term savings may end up in your investment account. For
right.
example, if you're going, they want to save for college or maybe Europe trip after they graduate from high school or something like that. And then the short term saving is for something that will happen in the next month or three
Mm,
months. That
right.
way they're not, they don't have to wait very,
Yeah.
very long to
Yeah.
actually accomplish that goal. Another thing that I like to do is, with kids, and just kind of going back to what you said about your son wanting designer clothes, and
Yes.
this costs a lot of money. So and
Yes.
my daughter is the same way. I have a daughter who's she's going to be 16 in a couple of
Yeah.
months, and my son, I'm going to have an adult child this year, so he will be turning
Nuts.
18. But I know, very nuts, yeah. But he's very different. He's not really into fashion. He doesn't really care much about his physical appearance,
Yeah.
whereas my daughter is completely opposite, and she wants the latest fashions and whatnot.
Mhm.
So we as parents obviously provide for her, and we give her a certain budget.
Yeah.
But she knows, it's kind of like, okay, here's your budget. She wanted a pair of Uggs, for example, as
Oh,
part
okay.
of
Yeah.
her back to school shopping. And we said, okay, you have $300 for back to school shopping. And that really was for jeans because their bodies change. And
Yeah.
so there were certain things that she needed to buy. But Uggs alone, because we were in Canada. So in
Yeah.
Canada, they're like $200. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think in the States, they're a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, you know what? For Uggs, I think this is something that you have to earn money for. Or
Mm.
we've done things that, it's like, oh, you need a winter jacket. Well, we're prepared to give you, I don't know, $150. If you want something more expensive than that, then you have to figure out how you're
Right.
going to earn and come up with the money
Right.
for
Right.
that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What about handling conversations about topics like debt or, family financial struggles? I got the most interesting question from a follower, community member yesterday. It was a couple days ago. She said, my child is at the age where they're starting to ask me personal questions about money, like, how much do you make? And she didn't know whether that was too personal. Her kids were 5 and 8. If that was a question that was too personal, or if it's something that she should be fully open with her children, or should she set those boundaries now? Because it's a very personal question to ask, how much do you make, even for a child asking a parent, right? And
Right.
so how do you have conversations about things like debt and family financial struggles with your kids?
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to go back to that specific question. So, when a child asks you, how much money do you make? Instead of answering that question right away, you should really just pause and ask them, why do they want to know? Because
Mm,
their answer will determine your answer. They could
mm,
be asking maybe because they've overheard you talk about being
got
stressed
it.
about money
Mm,
and that you don't make enough and that maybe they're afraid that you're going to lose your house,
yeah, yeah.
or maybe they're just comparing themselves to someone else. So depending on what their answer is, that can help you craft your answer.
Right.
My daughter asked me, and I actually just recently she asked, and I told her openly how much I make. But the
Mm,
reason why I did it, so I think you have to also understand, like, if you want to tell them, you have to understand why you are telling them, and you also have to make sure that they can keep a secret, right? That not the whole school
right. They're not
community
out
knows.
there telling everybody. Right.
Exactly. But for me, I want my daughter to be a strong, independent woman. And
Mm,
so I want her to get the education, which is what I've done. And so even if I wasn't, doing what I'm doing, being a social media influencer and author and all these other things, I still have my CPA degree to fall back on.
right.
So
Right.
me creating this business, and I'm trying to create more of a business that's a passive stream of income. So I
Mm-hmm.
like to show her, this is what I've done. I've done
Yes.
the work once, but this money just keeps coming back in, and this is how
Yes.
much money I make. So it was more like a learning opportunity, as well as uh, to show her what is possible. Because
Right.
in school, and I don't know, I mean, back in my day, when I went to school, all we learned was that, we could just do 9 to 5. And I
Right.
didn't really know much about entrepreneurship. I had to learn it on my own. So for her, I just want her to understand that you don't always have to exchange your money for time. You can
Right.
be an entrepreneur and you can do all these things. So that was my reason to explain to her, like, or actually answer her question. This is how much money I make. Like, here's,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because that's exactly one of the reasons why I'm so open with my son, James, is I want him. I feel like when we as parents try to hide our financial struggles from our kids, we lose the opportunity to teach them how to work through those own struggles in their own lives. So I've always been really open with my son, but that's another great thing and great point is being both of us are entrepreneurs. I want to teach my son that there's not only one way, right? There's not just, you don't, just going to college and working 9 to 5 is not the only way you make a living in your lifestyle. There are other opportunities open for you if you want to take them. So I love that answer. Now, before we started this recording, we talked about allowances, and you said there are 4 different methods for allowances. I get a lot of questions from my community members, and allowances is a very controversial topic. There are some parents who feel like, no, you shouldn't give your child an allowance because that's just part of being part of this household, right? That's just what we do to take care of our home and ourselves. But then you also have, I'm the type of mom where I feel like children really can't understand the concepts of their money until they have their own money. And there's different ways you can go about with giving them money and reasons why you give them money. It doesn't necessarily just have to be for chores. There are a lot of different options. So can we go over and can you talk about the 4, I believe it was methods that you talked about earlier?
Correct. Yeah. So I agree with you, Kumiko. I have seen people very, very heated arguments
Yes.
on social media over allowances. And one thing that I've discovered after teaching this for the last 13 years and talking to numerous parents is that there is not one single right way of doing allowance or teaching kids about money. The thing, what we need to realize about allowance is that allowance is a teaching tool. It is not a gift. A lot of times people think if you give money to someone that, it's like, oh, you're gifting them something. But in this case, you're actually gifting them an opportunity to learn about money. So it's
Right.
not just the action of giving that money and having that child like run away with that money and go spend it. The point is that you actually have to, once you give that money, you have to teach them what to do with that money.
Right.
And so there are 4 different allowance methods, and to choose one is entirely up to you. And I usually suggest to my followers, pick one. And if it doesn't resonate with you and if it doesn't work out, pick another one until you figure out what really works for you.
Right.
Picking allowance method, it really is dependent on your family values and the morals. So whatever
Okay.
resonates with you. So that's why a lot of people are having these struggles and arguments is because
Right.
we all have different values, right? Like different
Right.
things are important to us. So the first allowance method is allowance tied to chores. And obviously, if the child doesn't do the chore, they don't get paid. And
Right.
these parents believe that, they want to teach their kids the importance of hard work and that the
Work.
money doesn't
Yes.
grow on trees. And obviously, if the child doesn't do the work, they don't get paid.
Yes.
Then we have the allowance that is not tied to chores. And these parents believe that the chores should be done out of the duty as a family member and that no one's going to pay their child to make their bed or empty out the dishwasher when they become adults, right? This is just
Right.
something they need to do. So instead, these parents give the money as a learning opportunity. And what they do instead is that if, let's say, a child is not doing their chore, they'll take away other things like play dates or screen time. Things that are unrelated to money, but the money stays because they use the money to teach the child how to manage it.
Right.
And then
Okay.
there's a third method. It's the hybrid between the two. So these parents, they give a portion of allowance unconditionally once a week or once a month, however you choose it. And then the children have the option to earn additional allowance.
Got
And
it.
they can do tasks that, for example, parents would pay someone else to do, like a car wash, or I don't know. I used to pay my kids to shred my documents, confidential
Yeah.
documents, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise
Yeah.
I'd have to take them somewhere else. So that's the third method. It combines the two. And, once I explain this, usually a lot of people settle on this third method. But again, there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is some people feel very strongly about not giving allowance. And that is okay too. But one thing I caution these parents is that if you choose not to give allowance, there are 2 things that you have to do. One of them is you have to set stellar example how to manage money, because kids learn by watching you. They're little
Yes.
sponges. They will copy what you're doing. And then the second thing is that you should still try to give them opportunities to manage money. So an example would be like back to school shopping, where when they're younger, you're overseeing it, you're giving them a budget, whatever. But then as they get older, you literally give them, I don't know, $50, $100, whatever your budget is, I don't know, $300.
Yeah.
Say, here it is. You've done this with me over the last how many years? Now it's on you to manage this budget. And so off they go and they buy their own school supplies.
I love that. Okay, yeah, now that you're saying all that, I'm like all of those things. I kind of do all those things because in the beginning, I was kind of swayed by what other people were saying about, being a family member, these things just need to be done regardless of whether or not you're getting paid. I'm like, that's kind of true. So then I went on to giving my son an allowance if he did above and beyond what was expected. So maybe he had 2 books to read for school. If he read a third book, then he would have a chance to earn some money there, right? If he did some extra work outside of his chores, maybe mopping or sweeping or dusting or something like that, then he would earn some money. Then what happened is he gets $50 now every month. That just happens like clockwork. But we also, right, if he's not doing the work, then we take away gaming time or things like that. So I guess I would say I'm kind of all those things. But I will mention this was the first year. So I had a $350 back to school budget. My son knows how I save for that. I save a little bit from each paycheck throughout a year to get that money ready. And so I gave him the $350 this year. I did exactly what you just said. And I said, you have this money. Don't forget. What we did is we put his things that he needed to get for back to school. We put things in a needs list, like the things you need to get. And then we wrote down the want list. His job and responsibility was make sure everything on that needs list was checked off before he could go over to his want side. And so that was kind of our first time ever dealing with him being in charge of the back to school budget. So if you're working with someone who's maybe close to a teen, preteen, that's a great way to teach them how to manage their own money without per se giving them an allowance. I have some possible listener questions we're going to get to. Questions that have come up from my own community. How can I encourage my child to save money instead of spending it immediately? Exactly what my son is doing. What are some tactics and tips that I could use to get him to have that concept pat down?
So, one thing I like to ask the kids is to think about something that they want to, get uh,
Mm,
or achieve, a goal that's actually really, really meaningful to them. I want them to connect to that goal. I want them to find a picture of it on internet. And,
mm,
it's almost like a vision board
yeah.
that, when they look at it, you know, they can think, is it worth spending this money now?
Mhm.
Or can I wait to have that, whatever that is, right?
It's
Um,
exactly what we do with adult money.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
exactly what I do with my goals. Is I set that vision board. And I think, would you agree that that also has to do with teaching kids about trade-offs?
Yes, 100%. It's
Yeah.
always the opportunity cost. Like that's one
Yeah.
thing my daughter, she came home one day from school. This was before the holidays, and because she was on a rugby team, and
Mm,
she said they were having rugby hoodies, and she said she was telling me before that they were making these rugby hoodies, and she's like, they're really ugly. I don't really like them, whatever. And I was like, okay, like I didn't really think much of it. Comes home, she's like, oh, I want the rugby hoodie. And I said, okay, but I thought you don't like them. She's like, no, but they made them really cute. But then I really realized, I talked with her and I was like, everybody on the rugby team is getting them. So I think she's feeling a
mm,
little bit left out. So I said, okay, how much is this rugby hoodie? And she's like, I think it was like $60 or something. And I said,
yeah.
listen, you have so many teaching about opportunity costs. It's
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
have so many other hoodies. And I also have seen you sometimes get something and not wear it. So we're not going
Mm,
to be that family.
yeah.
That's the money that you can use to buy something else or spend on something else or even invest. I mean, if you
Mm,
want to invest in, and sometimes what I do with investing too is like I pull up the free online interest calculator and I show them how much that money is going to be worth, 10, 20
right.
years from now, right?
Right.
So with this hoodie, I was like, do you really want this? And we talked about it and she's like, you know what? No, she's like, I don't want it.
Mm,
So I was like, okay.
yeah. Yeah. I feel like learning opportunity costs and what real trade-offs are, because we make trade-off decisions all the time, all throughout the day. We just don't know we're doing it. I think that's something that isn't taught enough to our kids, that even though they may not realizing it, when they're dealing with money, they're making trade-off decisions every single
Yeah, there
time.
are a lot of questions that we could be asking ourselves. Just recently, I ended up posting something about, you know, how to, and I'm sure you've done this as well. Before we make any purchase, like think, 48
Mm-hmm.
hours, like give some
Mm-hmm.
time to think about this, like whether or not you want to purchase that. If it's something like a hoodie, like how many times are you really going to wear this?
Right.
If
Right.
is it like twice, then it's like what, like if it's $60, then it's like $30 per wear.
Yeah.
So there are all these questions to ask ourselves, and of course, there's opportunity cost, and then the big one, which I'm really trying hard to think about now, is like, what is this money, uh I guess, what is the potential of this money? What
Mm.
else? Yeah, so I guess it is opportunity cost as well as kind of like future investment value. But, not looking at the money for what it is worth now, but what it
Right.
could be worth going forward.
Yeah. And I always like to think about money as also like, how many work hours am I
Yes.
giving up? Am I giving up? Like, it was like, oh, $60. Okay. Well, you know what? That's 3 or 4 hours of work, just so you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know? Yeah. So I think that's a big one as well. All right. So what's the best way? Now, before we move on to any other questions, I noticed a couple of times during this interview, in this episode, you've talked about investing for kids. How do you invest for kids that are either minors or not the age of majority yet to invest? So how do we do that as in parents? How do we start our kids with investing?
There are a lot of options actually. And so what we need to do is we can open up an account, a custodial account, essentially in our name with the child as a beneficiary. There are three different accounts that, you know, anybody who lives in the United States can open. So we have custodial Roth IRA,
Mm-hmm.
which any money invested in this account has to be earned by the child.
Right.
So, if your child is very young, but you are a
Right.
business owner, you can hire your child to work in your business, let's say as a model for your advertising. And this is something that you would want to set up with an accountant. You want to make sure you set it up properly so you don't have
Right.
issues with, tax authorities later on. But by doing this, you're essentially getting a deduction
Mm.
for your taxes as a business owner. And then your child is not paying taxes either because your child is making less than the taxable amount. And
Yeah.
then this money is being invested and it's going to grow for your child. Another option is just investing in the 529 account. 529 plan. The beautiful thing about 529 plan now is that even if your child chooses not to go to college, you can transfer up to $35,000 from the 529 plan into the Roth IRA for your child after that money has been sitting in the 529 plan for 15 years. So
Yep.
that money is going to grow for them. And then the last option is the UTMA account.
Mm-hmm.
And you can invest in that account as well. Again, you are the owner of the account until the child reaches the age of maturity, depending on the state that you live in. That could be 18 or 21. And at that point in time, the child will take over that account.
Yes.
But
Right. Yes. I feel like just with the three accounts you just named, I mean, we could go through down like this big black rabbit hole of all the things with those because, it's true. The custodial Roth IRA is one that not a lot of parents do. Now, I did set my business up where I could hire minors. That, by the way, that is a step that you have to take. You have to do it. It has to do with part of your business licensing. You have to pay it extra to get that. At least I did when I set mine up. My son, I hired for my Pine Manor Naturals business, and I hire him to go in and do all the cleaning in my soap shed. He goes in and does all the cleaning, and then I invest that into a custodial Roth IRA for him. I also do the 529, and I've also done the UPMA. One thing I do want to quickly share now, if you are interested doing more of a deep dive, because investing is a whole other topic. You have income restrictions, you have a lot of different regulations, you have to look into tax all of these accounts, your money is going to grow tax deferred, tax-free growth. So, but you need to look at all the regulations associated with those. If you want more information on those 3 accounts, I did a whole series going over kids investing and saved in my highlight bubble on my Instagram if you're interested. But with the UTMA also, I do want to quickly mention age of majority, that account is no longer yours. You have no control. You don't get to decide whether or not they get it. At the age of majority, which here in the state of Washington is at the age of 21, they get access to that account even if you don't want it to happen. So just keep that in mind with that type of account. Maybe my main concern with the UTMA was if I invested a lot of money in there, right? $60,000, $70,000 by the time my son hit the age of majority, I may not want my son to have $70,000 at one time, right? At 21 years old. I've been 21 before, and I know for a fact that I was not ready and responsible enough to get that amount of money. So it's just something to keep in mind when it comes to investing for your kiddos. So a couple more questions. How do I balance teaching financial independence with providing for my child's needs? So that was one of the questions that someone asked me, and I'm like, that is such a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough, especially if you have the means
right.
to provide for your child. I actually grew up where I had to buy everything for myself. I mean, I was lucky to have the food and shelter. So that wasn't really, I grew up very differently from how my kids are growing up. And sometimes I feel like I purposefully have to create hardships for them to learn because
I get that.
Yes. And I think it's that whole thing about giving them a budget, like what you said, Kumiko, giving them a budget, back to school shopping. This is what your budget is.
Right.
And explaining it. It's like, here we have needs. We have a list of needs. We have a list of wants. You have to go through the needs first. And then if any money is left over, that's to be spent on wants. And, obviously use common sense. Like if you can spend less on needs by using coupons or figuring out, right? So it's like getting them to be creative, to spend less on needs so they can have more money left over on wants. That's a lesson. But I think it's, we have to sometimes make the conscious effort to teach these lessons, to give them opportunities, to make it hard for them. Because if you can outright provide and buy everything they want, it's a lot more difficult to teach financial independence that way.
100% agree. All right. So one more question. You said you've been doing this for about 13 years. Can you share a memorable success story from your work, from what you've been doing?
So, in my Wealthy Kids Investment Club, there are a lot of parents who not only that they didn't learn about money when they were growing up, but they really didn't learn about investing at all. And so now they're learning from scratch. And there was this one mom who was really, really scared. She was terrified because, first of all, her parents never invested. She came from a very poor family background, and in her mind, it was only rich people or men who invested. So we had to get over that mindset hurdle first. She also realized that if she does not learn how to invest, she will never be able to teach her kids.
Right.
So, and it wasn't a huge step. It was more that every few months we actually do a 4-week challenge. And in this challenge, the idea is that these parents would open up an account and invest, let's say $100, whatever they want, but a small amount of money. And that's kind of like their first investment. And so she accomplished that. And to someone it may seem like, well, what's a big deal? But to her, it was a big deal because it just showed that investing is not as complicated. And also, if you're starting to invest, it's like you're investing this like $100. So even if I make a mistake, I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. Right. But she felt like the way she was explaining it's like she said she was on top of the world because she just felt like, oh my gosh, like I can do this. Like I know
Yeah.
what I have to do. And then, we have these lessons and she continued watching the lessons, but that was a small step, but it was very meaningful to her that she did this on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And, she felt like she could keep going forward.
Right. Yeah. Investing can seem, whether you're doing it for yourself as an adult or you're doing it for a kid or trying to teach a child, investing can be very freaking scary. And I know that because I was in the investment industry for a very long time and I saw exactly that. It's because right now, especially with social media, investing has been made to be so freaking complicated. We see
Yeah.
all these things on social media about what investing should be, and it's so freaking complicated where we scare ourselves into being stuck and not doing anything. But the moment you do it like that mom, that small amount of money that one time, it's like, holy crap, it's complicated until it's not, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I think that's such a huge anytime you're on a financial journey, when you accomplish those small wins, to other people, it may not seem big, but every single time you're doing that, you're doing one of the most important things you can do on a financial journey, and that's building self confidence. Your ability to believe in yourself. And I cannot tell you how important that is as a parent teaching a child or you teaching yourself and being on your own financial journey, how important it is to believe in yourself and what you are capable of. Because without that belief, you fail to take action. And without action, there can be no change. And so that is a very, very big and powerful story because it's the small wins that get us to the next step. So huge. Okay,
Yeah.
so
If I
tell
may,
us. Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I just want to
Yeah.
say something to your point. There are, so this lady,
Mm-hmm.
she took she's in my membership. And I think that there are a lot of investing courses out there and a lot of people are consuming this information.
Mm.
They're learning about investing, they're reading books, but I think taking the action,
Yes.
taking that next step, I think that's what the huge deal is for a
Right.
lot of people, because you can consume all this knowledge, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so scary to take that first step. And I think that's what this was for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. Like you can consume all the self-help books and YouTube videos all you want, but until you take that new knowledge you just got and actually do something with it, you're in the same spot when you consumed it all.
Right.
Okay, so tell people where we can find you, whether a website, I kind of mentioned you on Instagram. Tell us what people where can find you and what you have going on, or maybe some things that you would like to share with the listeners.
Sure. So I am always hanging out on Instagram under the handle teach.kids.money. And I give a lot of helpful tips to parents how to teach their kids about money on there. And I also have a book called From Piggy Banks to Stocks, The Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. That is available on Amazon. And I have my Wealthy Kids Investment Club. So that is on the website wealthykids.club.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maya, for being on the Miko Love podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.